Oh, hello everyone. We have made it to week 4 of our walk through Philippians. I think we could have spent many more weeks looking at aspects of the book and some of the key teachings that are included, but I hope it's been good. It certainly has been challenging for me as considered the story of Paul and Timothy as they've planted the church, and then obviously writing back, Paul writing from Rome back to the church in Philippi, encouraging them, urging them on to faith and unity in their community. In week 1, remember we just looked at an overview of the book, learned a bit about the city and it being a Roman colony and some of the nuance of that. In week 2, we explored Paul's fearless faith. A remarkable guy who went from Pharisee to prolific church planter, walking away in the process from power and status and comfort, and seemingly willing to accept real threats to personal safety, all for the cause of knowing Jesus and knowing Christ. In week 3, we looked at the foundations of mission and community. As we've thought about our church and thought about the importance of having a purpose to our community and like rich community to bring people into, we discovered that there's humility as a key foundation on which those two things are built. A humility that in mission is willing to change plans, to accept that our best ideas and our best perspective on something might not be God's perspective. We read about Paul in the jail, ending up in jail on his mission trip, and then secondly, experiencing an earthquake and choosing in that moment not to look after his own personal safety and flee, but to consider the needs of the jailer. Like, this is a guy who was constantly assessing, what is the Lord speaking to me about now, at once being all in on the mission, willing to lay it all on the line, but not dictating how that looks, how that's worked out, and what is the best in the moment, willing to change travel plans as well. So, and then in community, Paul exhorting people to agree in the Lord and to focus on the divine work of the church, not to get tied up in entanglements from pride, but having humility to recognize that our human concerns are secondary, that the work of the church is divine and is to be prioritized. And so we have, coming out of that, fearless faith and this radical humility, but both very hard things. And the bar literally set by Jesus, by God coming to earth as Jesus, and a very hard bar to measure up to. In Philippians 2, we read that succinct poem which charts that coming from divine to earth, and yet assuming the role of servant and sacrifice in order to complete the mission, that humility and sacrifice for the sake of mission. Paul in Philippians then includes his own story, coming from Pharisee, walking away from all that comfort and privilege and power, and he tracks his own journey for the end goal of knowing Christ and to continue Jesus' work on earth. But as Kath said in week 1, I think Paul is not your everyday guy. Paul is a unique person, and quite hard to just look at his story and feel like, oh, cool, well, if Paul can do it, I can do it. I think few could say that. I certainly can't. And so we all want to see a resurgence of faith in our valley. We want to see our kids growing up in this community where they are seeing people being saved, they're seeing the power of the gospel at work, they're seeing lives changed and their parents in action. But we also know ourselves, and we know our weaknesses. We know that we get distracted by concerns at work or at home. And so, wrapping up Philippians, it's really important that we then consider, well, the Lord knows us and we know us. And yet the model we call to emulate is challenging. It feels out of reach. And so how do we stop ourselves from feeling overwhelmed by that? When we think about work and we think about the sacrifices we are being called to make in terms of a favor, or if we have concern about the fear of men, or like, what motivates that? How do we prevent ourselves from just taking a step back and keeping quiet, or not not being willing to walk away from some of those comforting things in our lives? And so this week we want to do that. We want to dwell on the work of Jesus in our lives. We want to spend time talking about the fact that Jesus initiates in our lives, that he initiates and he promises to bring that work in us to completion. That is not our performance. Some of the parts of Philippians can just feel like an impossible list of tasks, or an impossible level of sacrifice and commitment that in and of ourselves we just can't motivate. And yet our performance is not what's most important, but remembering what Christ has done for us. And as he calls us to these good works, we'll find that not only does he set the good works out for us to do, but then he empowers us with his Holy Spirit. And so those are the topics we want to talk about this week. I really hope that we'll come out encouraged. Some of our past chats might have felt quite heavy, just considering the work at hand. But I really hope that we can discover, like, what is it that Paul says, rejoice, rejoice. I say, in the midst of these hard times, like, what's the basis of that? How does Paul think that is possible? And how can we enjoy that positivity, as Jafet said last week? How do we allow that positivity to overcome the challenges that are ahead of us? So that's what we want to do this week. There are a couple of different readings, but I pray that you would be encouraged going through it, and that we'll have a great time to chat and share some of our own insights on Thursday. I'll see you then.